Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment with your thoughts. The Echo in the Grand Mall. The sweltering afternoon heat was a stark contrast to the sterile, impersonal chill of the Grand Mall. Ethan Hayes, a sharp 35-year-old in a custom navy suit, emerged from yet another high-stakes business meeting. His hands instinctively clutched his phone and a sleek Italian leather briefcase brimming with figures, contracts, and charts, the tools of a life he had always meticulously controlled. Everything, that is, except the silence that awaited him at home. As he strode towards the underground parking, lost in thought about a new luxury apartment complex, something unexpected flickered in his peripheral vision. A child's laugh, light, crystalline, like an echo from a past he had buried beneath layers of relentless work and crushing guilt. Ethan's head snapped around, searching for the source of the sound, and then he saw her, Clara Bell, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, wearing a simple yet elegant dress. Her face was more mature, stronger. Beside her, two small girls, twins, in matching pink dresses with white bows. They clutched rag dolls, and their eyes, oh, their eyes. Ethan froze, as if he'd hit an invisible wall. One of the girls, perhaps instinctively, turned and looked at him with an innocent curiosity that stole the air from his lungs. Those intense, unmistakable green eyes, they couldn't be a coincidence. They were his. They were his. Time, for an instant, ceased to exist. The mall's bustle dissolved. Voices around him became distant murmurs. He could only stare at this tiny version of himself, a reflection of what could have been. And at the center of that vision, Clara calmly knelt, adjusting the girl's shoes with a tenderness that pierced him. His heart, hardened by years of denial, exploded in a mix of recognition and raw panic. It was as if every wrong decision in his life had materialized in the form of two small girls, the daughters he always dreamed of having, the daughters he didn't know existed. Clara looked up and saw him. The impact was visible on her face. For a second, her eyes flashed with contained emotion, anger, pain, perhaps fear. But then she quickly turned, took the girl's hands firmly, and walked in the opposite direction, quickening her pace. Ethan tried to call out, but no words came. He stood rooted, a prisoner of his own paralysis. The childish laughter receded, swallowed by the crowd. He took a step forward, but it was too late. Clara and the girls vanished amongst the displays and corridors, and he remained there, lost amidst the luxury and concrete, his heart crushed by a cruel truth. It was only a few seconds, but his life would never be the same. The echo lingers. Ethan was still standing in the same spot, as if his feet had merged with the polished marble floor. His heart pounded wildly, a wave of dizziness threatening to topple him. He ran a sweaty hand across his forehead, trying to comprehend what had just happened. But all he could vividly recall, with painful clarity, were the eyes of that little girl. His eyes. It was impossible to deny. Those eyes didn't just carry genetics. They carried a soul, an expression of attentive, half-distrustful curiosity, just like his own as a child. He had seen himself in her, in an almost mystical lapse, as if time had opened a portal before him. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt fear. Fear of confirming what his heart already screamed. Slowly, dazed, he walked to where they had stood moments before. He looked around, like someone searching for clues to a crime already committed. The children's store was still there, with its colorful displays and tiny mannequins. But Clara and the girls had vanished, like a dream interrupted before its conclusion. He approached the shop window, observing the reflections, searching for something that would reconnect him to what he'd seen. Perhaps a trace of their presence, a forgotten toy, any sign. But there was nothing, except the uncomfortable silence of his own mind. Questions exploded within him, disorganized. Why didn't she ever look for me? Was she pregnant when she left? Are they really mine? But deep down, he already knew the answers to all those questions. The certainty in the girl's gaze left no room for doubt. This wasn't a coincidence. It was destiny collecting its due. With accelerated breathing, Ethan headed to the parking lot, not really knowing why. Perhaps an irrational impulse to find them out there, to confront Clara, to demand answers. But upon reaching the basement, he only found the echo of his own footsteps and the distant sound of engines starting. He sat on the concrete bench next to pillar number 37 and ran his hands through his hair in despair. Everything he had buried, the destroyed marriage, Clara's departure, the unresolved anger, the choked guilt, now returned like an avalanche. But there was something worse. A new, more piercing pain emerged. The pain of losing not just love, but an entire family he hadn't even known had begun. The lost time hurt, as if he had been cheated by a cruel universe. He remembered old conversations with Clara, the nights they talked about children, the names they imagined, the promises whispered between sheets. Sophia, Isabella, or perhaps Leo and Samuel. And now those girls existed, with faces, voices, gazes, with lives he hadn't been a part of. Ethan wept. Not with discreet, silent tears like those he used to hide behind whiskey glasses in his living room, but with an uncontrollable, choked sob, like a man who understands that no wealth in the world can buy back lost time. In that instant, more than ever, he knew. Clara had taken with her everything that gave meaning to his existence, and the little girl who looked at him was the cruelest, yet most precious reminder of everything he had destroyed with his own hands. The crowd in the mall continued its usual flow, indifferent to the emotional earthquake that had just occurred. While families laughed, couples took selfies, and vendors attended with practiced smiles, Ethan Hayes remained in the middle of the aisle, like a cracked statue on the verge of collapsing. His eyes swept the space with growing desperation. He needed to see them again. He needed to see Clara. And then, like a beam of light in the darkness, he found her. A few yards away, near the escalator, Clara walked quickly with a girl in each hand. Her steps were decisive, her body slightly leaning forward, like someone protecting the most precious thing in the world. She still hadn't realized he was watching her, but that was about to change. A group of teenagers ran between them, and the moment the view broke for a second, Clara turned and saw him. Her eyes met Ethan's with the force of a physical impact. She stopped. For a second, just one, the world was suspended. Her expression was unreadable. There was surprise, yes, but not the kind that leads to warm reunions or nostalgic tears. It was a cold, bitter surprise, like the taste of a poorly healed wound being ripped open. Her gaze hardened immediately. There was no nostalgia, no sadness. There was protection. There was a shield. Ethan took a step towards her, slowly, as if fearing to scare a wild animal. But Clara, with an abrupt movement, bent down, said something to the girls, and began to pull them away. The little ones, confused, stumbled slightly, trying to keep up with their mother's accelerated pace. They didn't look back. He tried to call her, "Clara!" But his voice died in his throat, choked by the crowd, swallowed by the mall's loudspeakers announcing promotions. He tried to reach her, but stumbled over his own fear, paralyzed by shame, by helplessness. It was like running after a train already in motion. From the top of the escalator, she turned her face one last time. There were tears in her eyes, but also determination. And then she disappeared, dragging her daughters by the hand like someone fleeing a ghost from the past who dared to cross the line of time. Ethan remained there, standing, watching the scene vanish before him like smoke carried by the wind. For a moment, he thought of following her wherever necessary, taking his car, tracking the city, going after every school, every bakery, every park. But something inside him stopped him. It wasn't fear. It was shame. Like someone who has been expelled from a paradise he helped destroy and now watches from outside in silence. He sat on a nearby bench, his hands trembling. What hurt him most wasn't the fact that Clara had left. It was the way she had looked at him. With pity, yes, but also with the hardness of someone who had survived without him, of someone who no longer needed him, and, above all, of someone who was willing to protect them from him, if necessary. In that instant, Ethan understood that winning back his family would be harder than facing any corporate crisis. Because there, before his eyes, were two girls who had never heard his voice, and a woman who had learned to live without forgiveness. A mausoleum of what could have been. The mansion gate in Northwood Hills opened automatically as Ethan swiped his magnetic card. Silence greeted him like an old acquaintance, heavy and indifferent, filling every corner of the immense foyer with a deafening emptiness. Lights flickered on by motion sensors, bathing the white marble in an almost clinical coldness. Nothing there seemed to have a soul. Nothing there remembered a home. Ethan left his briefcase on the console table, took off his jacket with mechanical movements, and stood there for long minutes. No sound, no movement. Only the discreet tick-tock of an expensive clock on the wall, as if marking the time he had lost, that which would now never return. He walked to the main living room, the one he never used. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows revealed a spectacular view of the illuminated city. But for him, everything was shadow. He sank into the dark leather sofa, disappearing into cushions too expensive to be comfortable. The echo of loneliness seemed to mock him, a cruel reminder that all that luxury couldn't fill the space left by an absence. Ethan ran a hand over his eyes. The image of Clara with the girls wouldn't leave his mind. The pink clothes, the girls' green eyes, the rigidity in Clara's face. How could he not have noticed? How could he have been capable of expelling her without even hearing her side? And, above all, how could he not have realized that she carried within her the daughters he so deeply desired? The house, once designed to welcome a family, was now a mausoleum of everything that could have been. The guest bedroom that Clara had planned as the nursery had remained locked for 2 years since she left. Ethan had never had the courage to open that door. But that night, something pushed him. He rose hesitantly, walking towards the East Wing corridor. He stopped in front of the white door, took a deep breath, and turned the doorknob. Light flooded in, revealing an impeccably arranged room, yet frozen in time. A white crib in the corner, stuffed animals, piled on a shelf, and on the wall, still taped with double-sided tape, the model of a blue sky Clara had painted with golden stars. Ethan ran his fingers over the drawn clouds and felt a physical pain in his chest. That was an altar to his failure. Every object in there represented a broken promise, a hope murdered by his blindness. The question hit him like a slap. How did I let this happen? There was no one left to blame. He couldn't blame Felicity or Mark. They sowed the lie, yes, but he chose to believe. He chose to judge Clara. He chose to turn his back on her when she needed him most. And now, the price was this: to live surrounded by gold, but sleeping among ghosts. He walked to the bar in the living room and poured himself a whiskey. Not to toast, but to try to silence, for at least an hour, the unbearable voice of conscience. But neither alcohol nor silence could numb the truth. His life was a brilliant but empty showcase. And for the first time, he realized that he had built all of it just to hide the ruined man who existed within. And there, in the solitude of his dream house, Ethan realized something simple, yet brutal. Everything he always wanted, a family, childish laughter, simple dinners with love, had been within his grasp. And he himself destroyed it. The whiskey sat untouched on the coffee table. Ethan remained motionless, his eyes lost on the ceiling, as if seeking answers in the marble was less painful than facing the memories. And inevitably, they came. Not the lies, nor the judgments, or the expulsion, but the beginning of everything. When he was just Ethan and she, just Clara. The beginning of everything. It was summer in Silverwood when they first met. He was 15, she 12. Ethan was bored at a charity gala organized by his stepmother when he noticed a girl handing out toys to children with a sweetness that seemed out of place in that forced environment. Clara wore a simple dress, her hair loose, and a genuine smile, unlike anything he knew. She didn't know who he was, had no idea she was standing before the heir to the Hayes Empire, and perhaps because of that, she treated him as an equal. When he approached, curious, and asked her name, she replied with disarming sincerity, "Clara Bell, but my grandmother calls me Claire, and you look too bored for someone surrounded by good food." He laughed. For the first time in a long time, he truly laughed. From then on, he began to frequent Silverwood with flimsy excuses. A social project here, a visit to an NGO there, all to see her. Clara attended a public school, helped her mother at the haberdashery, and dreamed of becoming a teacher. He, enveloped in armored cars and future commitments, felt suffocated in his golden world, and it was in her that he found oxygen. Afternoons together became routine. They shared ice cream sitting on park benches, exchanged notes, and doodled dreams in old notebooks. Clara spoke of a house with a balcony and plants in the windows. Ethan promised that one day he would buy one for her. Not for luxury, but because it was in that house that he wanted to live. The first time he kissed her was under an old oak tree, with the distant sound of jazz music. Clara was scared, not of him, but of the world around them. She knew they belonged to different universes, but Ethan always convinced her that their love was stronger than any difference. And for a time, it was. They grew up together. He secretly took Clara to high society parties. She taught him how to ride the subway without attracting attention. They shared secrets, losses, insecurities. Ethan met Clara's grandmother even before his own family approved of their relationship. It was in that modest house, smelling of homemade pie, where he first heard the word love with a true meaning. Clara loved him with a tenderness that couldn't be bought. She never asked for anything. She never demanded recognition. She only believed that one day the love they were building would be enough to overcome everything. And Ethan, although pressured by a world that judged appearances more than truths, believed in her with the same faith. Years later, when they finally married, it was a silent triumph against all odds. But now, in the silence of that empty mansion, Ethan wondered how such a pure, authentic love was buried under mistrust. What happened to that boy who dreamed of flowered windows, and that girl who made the world seem possible? And even more cruelly, he thought, did the girls, his daughters, inherit anything from that love? Or were they born and already surrounded by resentment and silence? The silent collapse, the passing of Mr. Edward Hayes, was not just the end of a corporate era. It was the beginning of Ethan's silent collapse. He was only 26 when he took the reins of Hayes Construction, a multi-billion-dollar empire with projects spread across North America. Headlines celebrated the prodigy heir, the new face of the American real estate market. But behind the cameras and the headlines, Ethan was still a young man, trying not to drown in the legacy left by an absent and relentless father. The funeral was a cold ceremony, as calculated as everything in Edward's life. Few true hugs, many handshakes, and mechanical speeches. Beside Ethan, Felicity, his father's second wife, wept discreetly. But her eyes didn't hide a disguised satisfaction. Mark, his son from the first marriage, maintained an expression too contained for a half-brother who was supposedly mourning the loss of a paternal figure. It was there that the silent war began. Ethan, still affected by the death and disoriented by the sudden demands of the presidency, instinctively trusted those he had known since adolescence, Felicity and Mark. They surrounded him with advice, lawyers, emergency decisions, and a false loyalty. Clara, newly married to him at the time, tried to warn him, but Ethan, torn between grief and pressure, didn't listen. Hayes Construction demanded quick decisions. Shareholders wanted security, the market wanted stability, and Ethan wanted peace. He had no time for doubts, nor for delicate conversations. Clara, with her sensitivity, seemed increasingly out of place in that world of meetings, figures, and contracts. He believed he was protecting her by not involving her, when, in reality, he was isolating himself from his only source of balance. Felicity took advantage. Subtly, she began to control the couple's personal finances, convincing Ethan to open joint accounts with asset protection clauses. Mark assumed strategic positions in the company, shielded by boards of directors that he himself manipulated. Little by little, the empire became a game of influences, where Ethan was the face, but no longer the mind. He still loved Clara, but time with her was reduced to silent dinners, postponed trips, broken promises. She tried to call him back, to remind him who he was before the figures, but he was submerged in a universe where feelings were weaknesses and trust a trap. The change was gradual, but devastating. Ethan began to act like his father, cold, distrustful, distant. Clara, who believed she could weather any storm with him, felt increasingly invisible. The mansion became an empty palace, and Felicity, observing everything with calculating eyes, waited only for the right moment to implode what was left. Mark, more ambitious than loyal, soon sowed seeds of distrust between Ethan and Clara. Veiled suggestions, innocent questions, insinuations. Do you really trust her? Does she understand your world? Don't you find it strange how she distances herself from important decisions? Ethan, already worn down, began to give in. The Hayes empire was his, but his heart was no longer. The decisions he made carried the weight of someone drifting away from himself. And while buildings rose, profits increased, and awards accumulated, Ethan slowly sank, unaware that he was being carefully pushed. And in the midst of all that, Clara watched, in silence, as the man she loved transformed into someone she barely recognized. The calculated lie. The tragedy didn't begin with shouts or public scandals, but with the whisper of a well-calculated lie. It all happened one seemingly trivial afternoon when Ethan received a call from Felicity, her voice trembling, her words carefully chosen. "You'd better come home. Something delicate has happened." Upon arriving, he was greeted by a surreal scene. One of the house's security guards held a small black velvet box open on the living room coffee table. Inside were 3 pieces of jewelry, an emerald necklace, a pair of ruby earrings, and a diamond-encrusted bracelet, all from Felicity's personal collection. Pieces that, according to her, had disappeared weeks earlier, And now, mysteriously appeared in Clara's closet. Ethan felt his blood run cold. Clara, standing by the stairs, held her car keys and looked at everyone with a mix of disbelief and indignation. "You know this is a lie," she said, looking directly at her husband. "You know I would never do this." But Ethan didn't listen. Or rather, he didn't want to listen. Felicity's voice still resonated in his mind. I didn't want to believe it, but it seemed strange to me that she was absent from the North Wing just the night of the gala dinner. Then the necklace disappeared. I thought I was forgetting things until, well, we found this, and there were the jewels found at the bottom of a drawer Clara rarely used. Mark appeared shortly after, with that feigned, embarrassed look. "Ethan, I know this is uncomfortable, but if it were anyone else, you would have called the police just because it's your wife. Well, it's your decision." Ethan, pressured, humiliated, and already emotionally distant from Clara, exploded. He didn't shout, but his words cut more cruelly than any scream. "Did you think I was that stupid, Clara? That you could play Cinderella and live off my family? I defended you for years. I put you here, and this is how you repay me." She tried to approach, tried to argue, but he raised his hand, demanding silence. "I want you out of here, today." Clara paled, but didn't cry. Her chin trembled, her eyes shone with contained tears, but her posture was upright, almost defiant. "You will regret this, Ethan, not for me, but for everything you don't know yet." He didn't respond. He just turned his back, like someone closing a door that would never open again. She left the mansion that night, carrying only a small suitcase, her phone, and an unbreakable dignity. No one saw her cry, no one saw her scream, but inside, she carried the biggest of all secrets, a secret that, if Ethan had looked with less anger and more love, he would have noticed. The subtle curve of her body already betrayed the beginning of motherhood. And as the fine rain fell over the marble entrance, Ethan watched her car disappear through the electric gate, believing he was ridding himself of a traitor. Without knowing that, in that instant, he was banishing from his life the purest love he ever knew, and the daughters he didn't even dream he was losing. The silent aftermath, the silence that followed Clara's expulsion, was more deafening than any argument. Ethan, poisoned by suspicion and a sense of humiliation, plunged into a state of denial that bordered on apathy. The next day, he didn't want to see anyone. He remained locked in his office, amidst piles of documents and contracts, pretending that the world hadn't crumbled outside. 2 days later, without even asking where Clara was, he asked his lawyers to draft the divorce papers. The process was carried out with the coldness of a business operation. Rigid clauses, inflexible terms, and a confidentiality clause that prevented her from discussing what had happened with the press. Ethan didn't want a scandal. He wanted the complete erasure of this woman he now saw as a betrayal of his history. Clara received the documents in a small apartment rented by a childhood friend. She was alone when she read the conditions. The alimony amount was generous, as if he were trying to buy her silence. But the gesture hurt more than the absence. Ethan didn't call, didn't search, didn't ask for explanations. He simply dispatched a legal envelope as if he were breaking a partnership contract. She could have fought. She could have told. She could have implored. But she didn't. Because deep down, Clara understood that there was no room in that heart for anything more than pride. And if he was capable of believing such a grotesque lie without even hearing her voice, then he didn't deserve to know the truth. Not yet. As she signed the papers, her hand trembled discreetly. Not from fear of facing the future, but from everything that symbolic act represented. In that moment, she severed the bond with the only man she loved. But she also made the decision to raise 2 lives with dignity, even if it meant never looking back again. Ethan, upon receiving confirmation of the signature, felt no relief. He felt something he couldn't name, a discomfort in his stomach, a pressure in his chest, but he convinced himself it was just anger. She had the opportunity to explain herself and said nothing. He repeated to himself, "Hervolt." It was easier to believe that than to face the pain of a possible injustice. While he returned to his mechanical routine of meetings and social cocktails, Clara began a new silent chapter. She went back to work as a substitute teacher at a modest school, rented a small apartment in Silverwood, and began to live with little, but with freedom. And every day, she felt the transformations in her body, morning sickness, the faint kicks that announced the future. She didn't tell anyone, not friends, not colleagues, not even her mother, who had passed away months before the breakup. The secret grew with her, in silence, and amidst the pain, she found strength. Every heartbeat in her womb was a reminder that love hadn't ended. It had just changed its form. When the girls were born in a delivery without flowers, without wealthy visitors, without social registries, Clara cried alone, but not from sadness. She cried for all the unfulfilled promises, for all the unspoken words, and for knowing that, even without him, she would never stop loving Ethan. She just wouldn't forgive him. Not yet. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Ethan toasted at a corporate event with foreign investors, surrounded by applause and flashes. No one there knew that, at that very moment, 2 girls were opening their eyes for the first time, and that, unknowingly, they were the heiresses of an empire, and of a story shattered by arrogance. The unveiling truth. That night at the mall never left Ethan's mind. For days he tried to convince himself that he had been mistaken, that those girls might not be his. But there was something that prevented him from moving on. The girl's gaze. That gaze was a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. Solitary in his mansion, he began to unearth memories, and silences he preferred to avoid. There were many gaps he never filled, details overlooked for convenience or pride. Little by little, Ethan understood that the only way to move forward was to go back, to revisit his own history. And that's when he began to hear the voices of the past. His first action was to re-examine the records of that fateful afternoon when the jewels reappeared in Clara's closet. He demanded copies of the internal security camera footage, something he had agreed not to see at the time, trusting Felicity's word. But now, with more attentive eyes, he noticed something strange. There was a lapse of almost 20 minutes in the images of the wing corridor where Clara rarely went. Enough time for someone to place anything there. Distrustful, he sent a forensic cybersecurity technician to analyze the files. The verdict was clear. The system had been tampered with. Someone had deleted specific fragments, and that someone could only be someone with full access, like Mark, who supervised the internal systems of the house and the company at that time. The discovery left him stunned. For the first time, the narrative that fueled his anger began to crumble, and with it came guilt. Ethan began to review old emails, statements, schedules, made notes, revisited testimonies. And with every step he took, Clara's version, the one he never had the decency to listen to, revealed itself to be more plausible. It didn't take long to discover more. One of the former household employees, fired shortly after the scandal, agreed to speak in exchange for confidentiality. He revealed that days before the discovery, he saw Felicity discreetly entering Clara's room with a black box, the same one in which the jewels were later found. "But I didn't say anything. I thought it was a gift or that she had authorization," he confessed, visibly nervous. With each piece fitting into place, Ethan felt the ground slipping beneath his feet. The real betrayal hadn't come from Clara, but from within his own family. People who claimed to be protectors, but masterfully manipulated the facts to distance him from everything that truly mattered. And the worst part? He facilitated it. He gave them all the tools to make it happen. He ignored his instincts, despised love, and lacked the courage to face the difficult questions when there was still time. Now, all that remained was regret. At the height of desperation, he sought out Clara's former doctors, wanting to confirm dates, to understand if she was truly pregnant at the time of the divorce. Discreetly and with some financial power, he gained access to clinical records that confirmed Clara had undergone prenatal care at a modest clinic just after the separation. The date matched the approximate age of the girls. Ethan was in shock. The daughters were his. There was no longer any doubt. The woman he swore to love was unjustly accused, expelled from home while pregnant, and still had the strength to raise 2 lives alone. The truth now was an almost unbearable burden. But he knew he couldn't back down. It was time to face his ghosts and make a decision. Either keep pretending nothing happened, or dive headfirst into the search for redemption, even if it cost him everything he had left. The reckoning, the folders on the office desk were stacked, each representing a new stab to Ethan's conscience. With trembling hands, he organized reports, copies of messages, testimonies, and dates. Each document read was like a shovel of dirt over the grave of his old conviction. And there, on that silent night, the truth imposed itself with overwhelming clarity. Clara had been the victim of a conspiracy, and he the executioner. The technical analysis of the doctored footage, combined with the testimony of the former household employee, was irrefutable. The jewels were planted. The exact time of Felicity's entry into Clara's room coincided with the missing recording window. It was a carefully orchestrated plot, a script he accepted as truth without even verifying the authenticity of the actors. But what completely destroyed his defenses was the report from the clinic in Silverwood. He had to resort to an acquaintance of the former doctor to gain access to the medical history. The file left no room for doubt. Clara began prenatal care 2 weeks after the divorce, under her full maiden name. She was approximately 7 weeks pregnant at that time. 2 babies, twin gestation, clear diagnosis. Ethan read and reread that fragment dozens of times. His daughters had been born while he was closing deals in Paris, launching luxury condominiums in Miami, and appearing smiling on the covers of business magazines. He had missed their birth. The first cries, the birthdays. There was no record of him on the birth certificates, no memory of hugs, of lullabies. The girls were growing up without knowing who their father was, and the father was a stranger, even to himself. The pain arrived as a physical outburst. He pushed his chair back, stood up, and punched the office wall, injuring his own knuckles. How could he have been so blind? How could he have let himself be poisoned by 2 power-hungry parasites? Mark and Felicity had won, at least for a time. But now, Ethan had something more powerful than resentment: the truth. That same night, he wrote a letter to his lawyer, demanding a review of all documents related to the divorce proceedings. He also ordered the freezing of Felicity and Mark's access to the company, discreetly initiating an internal audit. There would be no scandal, not yet. But he needed to clear every trace of toxic influence from his life before taking any steps towards Clara and the girls. But the real challenge wasn't in the papers or in the business reconstruction. It was in how, after everything, to approach the woman he had expelled while pregnant without even listening to her. How to ask for forgiveness. How to regain the right to be a father. And what if it was already too late? He sat down again, his fists still bleeding, and looked at one of the photos he had forgotten on the shelf. Him and Clara, smiling on the opening day of the first public school they funded together, back in the days when he believed that love could change the world. He looked at that man, and no longer recognized himself. The truth was now before him, naked and relentless. And for the first time, Ethan didn't flee, didn't hide behind figures or polished speeches. He rested his head in his hands and cried like a man who had lost everything, because he knew that only from complete destruction could something new be born. And then, as the morning sun began to illuminate the cold corridors of the mansion, he decided he would fight. For the truth, for redemption, and for those girls who had his eyes, and who, perhaps, could still recognize a father in him, shattering the facade. It was a cold, clear morning when Ethan arrived at the Hayes Construction headquarters. The mirrored building, a symbol of the family's power, reflected the bustling city sky with the typical arrogance of someone who had always been above reality. But that day, the glass facade was about to crack. For the first time in years, Ethan was willing to tear down the rotten pillars on which part of his life had been built. Ikyo entered the building without notifying anyone, unusual for a CEO. He was dressed in black from head to toe, without a tie, without a smile. He walked past the reception, ignoring the timid good mornings, and entered his office with a single order. Gather Felicity and Mark now, and bring the lawyers. The atmosphere froze. It took less than 10 minutes for mother and son to appear, somewhat unprepared for the confrontation. Felicity wore her traditional business suit, still feigning the haughtiness of a matriarch, and Mark, always perfectly groomed, entered with poorly disguised airs of superiority. "Good morning, Ethan. Any urgent problem?" Ethan looked at them in silence for long seconds before opening the folder on the table. He took out the documents one by one, the report on the tampered cameras, the testimony of the former employee, copies of Clara's clinical records. Each document was a sentence, each page a verdict. He placed everything in front of them with the calm of someone who no longer feared the truth. "You lied, manipulated, destroyed my family with surgical coldness." His voice was low, controlled, but charged with contained venom. "Felicity, you planted the jewels. Mark, you erased the recordings. You took away what I loved most. And worse, I let you." Felicity tried to speak. "Ethan, you're being irrational. That evidence can be forged." But he raised his hand, demanding silence. "You had your chance to speak 2 years ago. Now it's my turn." He turned to the lawyers. "Is everything ready?" The senior one nodded. "Dismissal documents and revocation of access, sir. The court order for asset seizure is being processed." Ethan then addressed Mark. "You are out of the company and out of my life. If you try to appeal, I guarantee you the process for falsification of evidence will go to the district attorney." Mark paled. For the first time, he lost his arrogant air. "You can't do this. I'm a shareholder." "You were. I bought all your shares last night for a symbolic value. It's all signed, even by Felicity." "Who authorized as your legal representative?" She knew the end was near. Felicity screamed, this time without masks. "You're getting revenge because that woman cheated on you. Clara never belonged in our world." Ethan then looked at her with a contempt that hurt more than any words. "And you never belonged in mine. Now get out." Without escort, without ceremony, mother and son left the office. Employees witnessed the scene in stunned silence. The quiet in the hallway said it all. That day, Ethan not only regained control of the company, but he finally renounced the comfortable lie he had lived for years. And as he closed the door behind them, Ethan took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, the air inside that office felt light. But he knew the real battle was yet to come. To win back Clara, to recognize his daughters, and to prove that the man who allowed destruction was now capable of building with truth, rebuilding a home, one step at a time. The mansion in Northwood Hills, once a temple of ostentation and silence, began to transform. Ethan, for the first time, wasn't thinking about aesthetics or status. Every change he made had an intimate, almost sacred purpose. He started with the bedrooms. He asked for the 2 bedrooms in the south wing to be remodeled, one in lavender tones, and the other with yellow and white accents. He put in small beds with animal-themed headboards and ordered toys, books, and lamps with clouds. Sophia and Isabella would have their spaces, even if they didn't know it yet. He personally supervised every detail. He dismissed decorators and demanded simplicity. He wanted to create a home, not a showroom. In their rooms, he scattered children's books, bought dolls similar to those he had seen at the mall, and even had a small shelf installed with empty picture frames, where, one day, he hoped to put family photos. It was his way of apologizing in silence. The kitchen was also transformed. For the first time, he fired the private chef and hired a simpler cook, one who knew how to prepare rice pudding, homemade soups, and carrot cakes with chocolate frosting. Dishes from Clara's childhood that he cherished in his memory with an almost painful affection. As the house changed, he also transformed. He began to avoid social events, refused interviews, detached himself from corporate boards. The tabloids noticed his disappearance, but Ethan didn't care. For the first time, he lived away from the cameras and closer to his own conscience. Still, he didn't have the courage to approach Clara directly. He knew he didn't deserve to be received with open arms. So he did what he could. He began to observe her from a distance, like a silent penitent. He discreetly found out where she worked, a simple but well-maintained school in Silverwood. In the late afternoons, he would park far away and watch the girls skip out, with colorful backpacks and laughs that tore him apart inside. One Sunday morning, he followed her to a small bakery in the neighborhood. Clara bought artisanal bread, chatted with the clerks, and let the girls choose a sweet treat. Ethan observed everything from inside his car, with the window slightly open, his heart torn between love and guilt. The girls seemed happy, and Clara, even more beautiful than he remembered, more woman, stronger. In a timid attempt to show repentance, he began to leave flowers on her mother's grave in the old town cemetery, always white daisies, Clara's favorites. He never left notes. He didn't want to pressure her or force her to forgive. He just wanted to show that he was still there, that he hadn't forgotten, and that, in some way, he still honored her. Ethan also started going to therapy, a small but gigantic step for someone raised in a world where feelings were treated as weaknesses. He talked about his father, about guilt, about the night he lost everything. He cried, screamed, broke his own pride, and little by little rediscovered the boy who dreamed of flowered windows and ice cream afternoons. At the company, he created a support program for single mothers with access to housing and free childcare. He reformed the social responsibility area, demanding more humane and less aggressive practices. His shareholders were surprised, but he no longer answered to investors. He would only answer to the girls who would inherit his name, if they accepted him. And by one late afternoon, as he watched Clara take Sophia and Isabella's hands to cross a street, he whispered to himself, "Maybe I don't deserve forgiveness, but I will fight for it, every day until the end." The patient observer. Ethan became a patient observer. His days, once occupied by charts, dinners, and figures, began to be marked by the silent clock of Clara's and the girls' lives. With almost reverent care, he avoided being seen. He followed from afar. He parked on opposite corners, observed without intervening. It was like spying on a universe that had almost been his, and that now existed independently of him. Clara's routine was simple, yet profoundly beautiful. In the mornings, she took Sophia and Isabella to school, a colorful neighborhood building with murals drawn by children and old trees in the yard. Always hand in hand, the girls would laugh, singing some made-up song, while Clara carried their tiny backpacks with a patience only mothers know. Afterward, she would go to work. A pedagogical coordinator at a public school, she walked the hallways with a firm posture and a welcoming expression. Ethan watched her resolve conflicts between teachers, calm distressed mothers, and organize reading fairs with a sparkle in her eyes that he had forgotten. In each discreet visit, he discovered a new facet of her, more mature, more complete, stronger. In the late afternoons, Clara would stop by the neighborhood market to buy fresh fruits and vegetables. She chatted with the stallholders by name, laughed naturally, and carried her bags with the same care with which she had nurtured their relationship years before. With dedication and truth, the girls greeted her with tight hugs at the end of the day, and that moment, especially, always made Ethan hold back tears. Saturdays, their destination was the community park, a space without grand attractions, but full of life. Ethan would sit on a distant bench, watching the twins play in the sand, climb the slide, run among the trees. Clara accompanied them with attentive eyes, but without smothering them. She knew when to let them fall, to wait for the tears to pass, to offer her lap at just the right moment. He watched her tie shoelaces, wipe paint-stained hands, invent stories with improvised puppets. He saw when one of the girls fell, scraping her knee, and Clara calmly knelt, blowing on the wound and saying in a serene voice, "You are strong, my love. It will pass." It was the same phrase she used to tell him when, in difficult times, he doubted himself. In all those moments, Ethan saw Clara's silent strength, the strength he in the past had mistaken for fragility. She didn't need luxury or cameras or jewels. Her strength was in routine, in constant presence, in the love that overflowed in small, true gestures. And he, even from outside, felt closer to her with every step. But he also realized something else. Clara no longer seemed to carry the hope of a reunion. She smiled with her daughters, made plans with friends, read books in local cafes. It was as if she had closed the cycle of pain, and now she only cared for what remained, the love for her daughters. Ethan understood that, perhaps, he had arrived too late. Still, he didn't pull away. On the contrary, that feeling only grew. He wanted to deserve to see her up close. He wanted one day to be able to play in the park with the girls, without hiding behind the trees. He wanted to sit with Clara, even in silence, and hear about all the days he had missed. But for that, he knew, he needed to prove himself with actions, not with words. And so, he decided that observing was not enough. It was time to act, with humility, with truth, and with the patience of someone who knows that to rebuild something sacred, one must first deserve to re-enter the temple. Silent gestures of redemption. Ethan knew he couldn't just knock on Clara's door and simply ask for forgiveness. Not after everything he had done. Forgiveness, if it came, would have to be earned. And as if learning a new language, more subtle, more human, he began to communicate with her through silent gestures, small acts of redemption. The first was at the Silverwood Cemetery. Ethan returned to Clara's mother's grave on a cloudy morning, with a bouquet of white daisies, her favorite flowers. He placed them carefully on the simple marble, along with a small, unsigned note. "Forgive me for everything I didn't understand in time." He didn't expect a response. He just wanted her to know that someone still remembered. Then, he began to send discreet gifts to the girls. A box of colored pencils and storybooks arrived at the doorman's desk of Clara's building with an anonymous card. For two little artists. Another day, a pair of children's rain boots with unicorn drawings was left by the mailbox. Ethan always made sure they were useful, delicate, and never invasive. Clara was surprised at first. She even suspected a promotional campaign or a mistake. But when the gifts started arriving regularly, with a sweetness that bordered on intimacy, she understood. There was no signature, but there was something more revealing. The care. And that care, she knew. It was Ethan's care, or the care of the man he was trying to become. Even without knowing if she wanted to allow the reapproach, she didn't prevent it. She kept the cards, used the books with the girls, subtly watched the new toys integrate into the household routine. There was resentment, yes, but there was also a silent recognition. He hadn't disappeared. And that, in some way, was significant. Ethan also started frequenting the same places, but never crossing the line. The bakery, the market, the park. Sometimes, he would pay for her coffee before she arrived. Other times, he would discreetly buy the same breads she usually got and leave them with the clerk, so she would receive them as a courtesy from the house. Little by little, the city seemed to collaborate with his invisible efforts. One rainy Sunday, Clara found a knitted blanket folded on the park bench, where she used to sit with the girls. It was light blue, with simple cloud embroidery. A new note. For when the wind comes, may a warm hug never be missing. She smiled, not out of happiness, but out of recognition. A small gesture, but one that carried deep pain and a sincere attempt to repair. Ethan knew that any direct word would be premature, so he continued this way, present in absence. Watching the girls grow from afar, celebrating every smile he captured, every drawing they proudly showed their mother. He began to collect these moments in silence, like a diary of stolen affections, like a father finally awakening to his mission. He wasn't seeking pity, nor immediate approval. Above all, he wanted to be worthy of their affection one day. He knew Clara was evaluating every step, every gesture, and so he didn't rush anything. He only planted small seeds with the hope that one day some would sprout. And in that wait full of silent gestures, Ethan began to understand something he had never understood in the business world, that the other's time must be respected, that true love is not demanded, and that sometimes the first step to being a father is learning to be human. The first steps. It was on a peaceful sunny Sunday, one of those days when the sky seems especially blue, that Ethan felt the time had come, not out of impulse or anxiety, but because, after weeks of silence, delicate gestures, and an almost invisible presence, something inside him whispered that it was time to step forward. A small step, but the most difficult of all. Clara was sitting on her usual bench, reading a book, while watching the girls play in the sandbox. Sophia molded castles with concentration, and Isabella ran with a doll dangling from her hair. Ethan, a few meters away, observed as always. But that day, he felt his heart quicken. He was about to cross the invisible line between repentance and reunion. He walked slowly across the park, his hands sweaty, his thoughts swirling. The fear of making a mistake, of scaring them, of being rejected, weighed more than any shareholder meeting or public speech he had ever given. But still, he walked. He stopped a few steps from the sandbox, knelt down, with the care of someone approaching something sacred. "Hello," he said. Almost in a whisper, the two girls stopped for a second, surprised. Isabella was the first to look out to him. Then Sophia. Neither of them smiled. They just looked at him with attentive, silent eyes, like someone evaluating a stranger. Ethan tried a hesitant smile. I see you're building castles. Can I help? They looked at each other. Sophia frowned. Who are you? She asked, with the direct firmness of children who haven't yet learned to disguise mistrust. Ethan swallowed. I'm a friend of your mom's. The answer came out trembling, incomplete, but it was what he could say at that moment. Isabella approached a little, curious, but didn't sit down. Do you live here in the park? She asked, with the most charming innocence Ethan had ever known. He laughed, a knot in his throat. No, little one. I just like to come here once in a while. The girls didn't respond. They went back to playing, but with less enthusiasm. His presence created a subtle tension in the air. From the bench, Clara watched. She had noticed him from his first step, but she didn't intervene. There was no anger in her gaze, just a severe serenity. She would let him try. She would let the girls feel for themselves. But if he made any false move, an invasive gesture, a lie, she would be ready to interrupt. Ethan stayed there for a few minutes, in silence, helping to build a sand tower that soon crumbled with the same ease as his old life. When Isabella let out a, "Careful, it's going to fall," he smiled, feeling something ignite within his chest. It was little, almost nothing, but it was the beginning. Before getting up, he looked at both of them tenderly and said, "You two are very special, did you know? Keep doing beautiful things. I hope to see you again." And he walked away, with slow, heavy steps. There was no hug, no goodbye. But he knew. Something had shifted. It was the first contact. And like everything that truly matters in life, it was strange, uncomfortable, and imperfect. But true. And that was enough for Ethan to keep trying. The unspoken truth. That afternoon, the sky threatened rain when Ethan returned to the park. The heavy air perfectly mirrored what he felt inside, a contained pressure, on the verge of collapsing. After the brief contact with the girls, he knew the next step was inevitable. He needed to face Clara, not with justifications, but with humility, and with the willingness to listen to everything she needed and deserved to say. He saw her in the distance, standing by the bench, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on him. The girls were far away, playing with other children. There were no distractions, just the two of them. The world seemed to have fallen silent around them. Ethan walked slowly towards her. Time seemed to stretch, as if each step brought to the surface the ghosts that separated them. When he finally stopped in front of her, Clara said nothing for a few seconds. She just looked at him, a gaze that contained all the seasons of an unresolved grief. Love, pain, anger, longing, and disdain. "You had the nerve to approach them?" she finally said. Her voice was low, firm, like a sharpened blade. Ethan tried to respond, but his throat failed him. "Did you look into your daughter's eyes and believe a sandcastle would erase what you did to me? To them?" Her words were cutting, and he didn't try to defend himself. He just lowered his head. "Clara," he began, but she interrupted him with a gesture. "No, now you will listen." Her eyes were teary, but her posture was upright, proud. "You humiliated me, accused me without listening, threw me out onto the street pregnant with 2 girls, without a penny, without support, without even asking if I was okay. I bled alone at night. I was afraid of losing them. And you were toasting with your parasites." Ethan felt every word like a blow to his chest. He tried to stay firm, but his eyes also filled. I know what I did, and there's no excuse, only regret. I discovered everything. The hoax, the recordings, the medical reports. I was blind, weak, cowardly. You were cruel, Ethan." Her voice trembled. "And the worst part? Not even out of malice, but out of weakness. Because it was easier to blame me than to face your own demons. You didn't destroy me because you hated me. You destroyed me because you were incapable of truly loving without control." He closed his eyes, swallowing the pain. "You're right, and I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness expecting you to take me back. I came to ask to deserve to be forgiven. One day, even if it takes the rest of my life." Clara looked at him in silence. The fury seemed to give way to something even deeper, the exhaustion of pain. "I rebuilt my life alone, and the girls are fine without you. I know, and I will never be in the way. I just want to be close, even from afar. And if one day they ask about me, I want you to be able to tell them that I tried, even if it was late." Clara took a deep breath, looking at him, as if trying to decipher if there was sincerity there. And she found it. Not trust yet, but sincerity. And because of that, after long seconds, she said, "I don't hate you, Ethan, because if I hated you, it would be easier. But what you did isn't fixed with flowers or with toys. If you want to re-enter their lives, you're going to have to start from the ground up, and you're going to bleed, because I bled." He nodded, tears falling freely. "I accept." And then, without another word, Clara turned and walked back to her daughters. Ethan remained there, alone, under the cloudy sky, feeling the fine rain begin to fall. But he didn't run. That water was washing something deeper than his skin. It was the beginning of truth between them. Raw, difficult, but real. A crack in the wall. 2 days passed since the confrontation in the park. Ethan didn't try to see them in that time. He knew he needed to give space, to let Clara breathe. But that night, something compelled him. It was no longer just remorse. It was a need for truth. For the first time, he wanted to fully open his heart, to show her everything he had discovered, everything that was destroying him inside. Clara received him hesitantly at the door of her small apartment. There were no smiles, no welcome, just a firm gaze and a clear boundary. "You have 15 minutes, Ethan." He nodded, swallowing his tension. He entered slowly, almost guiltily. The atmosphere was simple but cozy. On the walls, children's drawings, photos, a doll forgotten on the sofa. The home he never knew. She invited him to sit, but remained standing, watching with crossed arms. He took a folder from his backpack, the same one he had already opened before Felicity and Mark. But this time, there was no anger. There was pain and a desire to repair. "I discovered everything, Clara," he began, his voice low but firm. "The camera tampering, the employee's testimony, the evidence that Felicity planted the jewels. Mark erased the recordings. They manipulated me, and I let them." She said nothing, just stared intently, as if testing every syllable. Ethan continued, "I saw your medical records. I learned about your prenatal care, about the beginning of the pregnancy. The dates match. I lost everything. I lost youth, and it's my fault. There's no argument, no excuse." His voice failed him. His hands trembled slightly as he leafed through the documents, as if that could organize the chaos within. Clara approached slowly and took the folder. She sat beside him, maintaining a safe distance. She read a few pages in silence, her brow furrowed, her eyes teary. When she finished, she closed it slowly and looked at him. "Why are you showing me this now? Why didn't you just leave everything as it was?" Ethan sighed deeply, his eyes fixed on her. "Because even if I don't deserve it, I need to fight. I need to at least try to get something back, even if it's just your trust, or the chance to look at you without fear. I don't want to invade your life. I want to be close. I want to be someone they can know. One day, in time." She looked at him for a long time, and for the first time, the expression on her face softened. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. "You were the worst kind of man, Ethan. The one who hurts not out of malice, but out of absence. The one who abandons without looking back. I was abandoned at the moment I needed you most. Not by accident, but by your choice. I know. He swallowed. And that's exactly why I'm here. Not for them to know me, but for you to allow me to transform into the man I should have been from the beginning. He lowered his head, his voice choked. If you let me, if you guide me, even little by little, even if I stay out of their lives for years, I accept. Just don't ask me to give up. Silence. A long silence. And then Clara spoke, her voice trembling, but firm. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust again, but perhaps I can observe what you do with that repentance. She stood up. She crossed her arms, but this time without rigidity. If you want a chance, start from scratch, with truth, with patience, with presence, without rushing. Ethan nodded, tears in his eyes. Thank you for not closing the door. She walked to the entrance, and before opening it, she looked over her shoulder. This isn't forgiveness. It's just the first crack in the wall. The rest depends on you. And when he left, feeling his heart still in ruins, he knew something had changed. It wasn't redemption, but it was the beginning of a possible path, and he would walk every step with the humility of someone who knows he made a mistake, and who is willing to bleed, to deserve healing. The slow bloom of family. The first time Ethan could see the girls up close without hiding was at an impromptu picnic organized by Clara on a sunny Sunday. It wasn't a formal invitation. She just sent him a short, almost dry message. We'll be at the park at 10 a.m. if you want to stop by. No promises, no gestures of affection. But for Ethan, it was like receiving a temporary pass to a world from which he had been exiled. He arrived promptly, holding a small bag with fruits and a children's book. Clara was already there, sitting on a checkered blanket with the girls playing around. Seeing him, Sophia gave a curious expression. Isabella just observed him, without emotion. Clara didn't smile, but nodded, indicating he could approach. It was enough. In the first few minutes, Ethan remained silent. He sat carefully, far enough not to invade, but close enough to be present. The girls continued with their toys, distrustful. He watched them with teary eyes, trying to contain the urge to hug them. He knew he was still a stranger to them, and he would respect that time. At the second meeting, he risked reading a story. Clara watched him like a sentinel. But when Isabella approached with a little book in her hands and said, "Read this," Ethan felt his heart falter for an instant. His voice trembled as he read. But the girl laughed at the end, and Sophia came to sit beside him. It was little, but it was a beginning. The meetings began to happen on weekends, sometimes at the park, other times at cafes or children's bookstores. Clara was always present, always alert. She didn't let her guard down, but she didn't keep it completely up either. She began to recognize, albeit reluctantly, that the man in front of them was no longer the same as before. The girls started referring to him as the park friend. Until one day, in a childish slip, Sophia asked, "Mommy, is the park friend coming to my birthday?" Clara hesitated. She looked at Ethan, then at her daughter. "Maybe, if he keeps behaving." It was the first time they laughed together, though with a touch of irony. Ethan didn't force anything. He learned to wait for their gestures. He offered help, but didn't impose himself. When the girls got hurt, he let Clara go first. When they called him, he went slowly. He knelt down. He looked them in the eyes. He tried to be a presence, not a figure. He learned every day what it was to be a father, not in name, but in gesture, in gaze, in listening. During a rainy afternoon, Clara surprised him by asking, "Do you want to take them to the movies next Saturday? I have a meeting." Ethan paused before answering. "Only if you think they're ready." She reflected. Then she said, "I don't know if they are, but you need to learn to be. Trust came in drops, not in waves. But Ethan accepted. He took the girls to the movies. He bought popcorn. He cared for them as if the world were in his hands. When Clara met him at the end of the show, she saw something different in her daughter's eyes, a new kind of familiarity, a sparkle she didn't expect to see so soon. And that day, as she closed the car door after dropping them off at home, Clara said with a contained voice, "Keep going like this, and maybe one day I'll look at you the way I used to." Ethan nodded, his heart shattered and reborn at the same time. Because he knew, true love isn't born of promises. It is rebuilt in silence, with small steps and outstretched hands. The unfolding tapestry. Ethan's life became marked by small events, subtleties that, to many, might seem insignificant. But for him, they were daily miracles. The first daddy slipped from Sophia's lips when he picked her up from school for the first time. There were no fanfares, no tears, just the word, tossed into the air, as natural as a sigh. He stopped, looked at her as if seeing the world for the first time, and just said, "Hello, my love." Inside, his heart danced. Isabella was more reserved, but with her came the silent hugs. One day, seeing a dog on the street, she instinctively took his hand and squeezed it tight. Ethan didn't comment. He just held it back with firmness and reverence. That was more than a touch. It was acceptance. He began taking them to school twice a week. He prepared breakfast when Clara had early meetings, and he learned to make crooked braids that the girls corrected with laughter. The mansion, once cold, began to come alive. They still didn't sleep there, but each visit was a step closer. The remodeled bedrooms finally filled with sound. Laughter, songs, cries, and small fights over toys. He didn't complain. He thanked in silence. Ethan learned that being a father wasn't about biological presence or a name on a birth certificate. It was about being there for the first loose tooth, for the fear of the dark, for the scribbled drawings that made no sense, but which he framed as art. He discovered the value of listening without interrupting, of saying, "It's okay," when ice cream fell to the ground, of learning the names of the dolls, and remembering which twin hated carrots. Clara watched from a distance attentively. They weren't a couple yet. There were still scars, of course, and some still bled. But resentment no longer defined them. Ethan had changed, not as someone acting out repentance, but as someone rebuilding from within. He was no longer the man who needed to be right. He was the man who needed to be true. He didn't want applause, nor quick redemption. He wanted to live up to the two girls who ran through the house in flowing dresses, with endless questions about the world. There were days when everything seemed to flow, and others when Clara closed herself off, distant, guarded. In those moments, Ethan simply respected it, knowing that trust is not demanded. It is watered. It is waited for, like someone planting a garden that perhaps another will harvest. And that, in itself, already made him different from the man he had been. One Saturday night, after putting the girls to bed, Clara stayed on the balcony with him. The moon illuminated the newly tended garden. She held a cup of tea, he, a glass of water. There were no plans laid out, no promises, but there was something between them, something silent, warm, full of possibilities. "They're happy," she said, looking at the sky. "And you?" he asked unhurriedly. Clara hesitated. "I'm learning to see you with different eyes, to see myself without so much burden." Ethan smiled. "Me too. I'm learning to deserve it." She didn't respond, but rested her head briefly on his shoulder before standing up and saying, "Good night." It wasn't a happy ending in the traditional sense. There was no, and they lived happily ever after. But there was the most important thing, the mutual willingness to keep trying, to keep walking, one step at a time, one gesture at a time. Because true love, when it survives pain and time, doesn't return as it was before. It returns stronger, more mature, and freer. Ethan knew he would still make mistakes, that he would still cry, that there would still be difficult days. But he also knew that he would never again live on autopilot, that he would never again let love slip through his fingers. And that was enough, because sometimes life doesn't give us a new beginning, but it gives us a second chance, and with it, the hope of doing everything differently. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.